Velerad, castellan of Vizima, scratched his chin. He was neither superstitious nor faint-hearted, but he did not relish the thought of being alone with the white-haired man. At last he made up his mind.
"Leave,"
he ordered the guards.
"And you, sit down. No, not there, farther away if you please."
The stranger sat down. He no longer carried his sword or black coat.
"I am Velerad, castellan of Vizima,"
said Velerad, toying with a heavy mace lying on the table.
"And I'm listening. What do you have to say to me, you brigand, before you are thrown into the dungeon?" 3 killed and an attempted spell casting. Not bad. Not bad at all. Men are impaled for such things in Vizima. But I'm just a man. So I will listen to you before you are executed. Speak."
The Rivian unbuttoned his jerkin and pulled out a wad of white goat leather. "You nail this crossways in taverns," he said quietly. "Is what's written here true?"
"Ah,"
Velerad grunted, looking at the runes etched into the leather.
"So that's it. And I didn't guess at once. Yes, it's true. It's signed by Foltest, king of Temeria, Pontar, and Mahakam, which makes it true. A proclamation is a proclamation, Witcher, but law is law, and I take care of law and order in Vizima. I will not allow people to be murdered, do you understand?"
The Rivian nodded to show he understood. Velerad snorted with anger.
"You carry the Witcher's emblem?"
The stranger reached into his jerkin once more and pulled out a round medallion on a silver chain. It pictured the head of a wolf, bearing its fangs.
"And do you have a name?" "Any name will do, it's simply to make conversation easier."
"My name is Geralt."
"Geralt, then. Of Rivia, I gather from your accent."
"Of Rivia."
"Right. Do you know what, Geralt? This..."
Velerad slapped the proclamation.
"Let it go. It's a serious matter. Many have tried and failed already. This, my friend, is not the same as roughing up a couple of scoundrels."
"I know. This is my job, Velerad, and that proclamation offers a 3,000 Oren reward."
3,000? Velerad scowled. "And the princess as a wife, or so rumors say. Although gracious Foltest has not proclaimed that."
"I'm not interested in the princess," Geralt said calmly. He was sitting motionless, his hands on his knees. "Just in the 3,000.
"What times?"
sighed the castellan.
"What foul times. 20 years ago, who would have thought, even in a drunken stupor, that such a profession as a witcher would exist? Itinerant killers of basilisks, traveling slayers of dragons and vodniks. Tell me, Geralt, are you allowed beer in your guild?"
"Certainly." Velerad clapped his hands.
"Beer!" he called. "And sit closer, Geralt. What do I care?"
The beer, when it arrived, was cold and frothy.
"Foul times,"
Velerad muttered, drinking deep from his tankard.
"All sorts of filth has sprung up. Mahakam in the mountains is teeming with boogeymen. In the past it was just wolves, howling in the woods. But now it's kobolds and spriggans wherever you spit, werewolves or some other vermin. Fairies and Rusalkas snatch children from villages by the hundreds. We have diseases never heard of before. It makes my hair stand on end. And now, to top it all, this."
He pushed the wad of leather back across the table.
"It's not surprising, Geralt, that you Witcher's services are in demand."
"The King's proclamation, castellan." Geralt raised his head. "Do you know the details?" Velerad leaned back in his chair, locked his hands over his stomach.
"The details? Yes, I know them. Not first-hand, perhaps, but from a good source."
"That's what I want."
"If you insist. Then listen."
Velerad drank some beer and lowered his voice.
"During the reign of Old Metal, his father, when our gracious king was still a prince, Foltest showed us what he was capable of, and he was capable of a great deal. We hoped he would grow out of it, but shortly after his coronation, Foltest surpassed himself. Jaw-droppingly, he got his own sister with child. Ada was younger and they were always together, but nobody suspected anything, except perhaps the queen. To get to the point, suddenly there is Ada with a huge belly and Foltest talking about getting wed to his sister. The situation was made even more tense because Vizima of Novigrad wanted his daughter, Dalka, to marry Foltest and had already sent out his envoys. We had to restrain Foltest from insulting them, and lucky we did, or Vizima would have torn our insides out. Then, not without Ada's help, for she influenced her brother, we managed to dissuade the boy from a quick wedding. Well, then Ada gave birth. And now listen, because this is where it all starts. Only a few saw what she bore. But one midwife jumped from the tower window to her death, and the other lost her senses and remains dazed to this day. So I gather that the royal bastard, a girl, was not commonly, and she died immediately. No one was in a hurry to tie the umbilical cord, nor did Ada, to her good fortune, survive the birth. But then Foltest stepped in again. Wisdom dictated that the royal bastard should have been burned or buried in the wilderness. Instead, on the orders of our gracious king, she was laid to rest in a sarcophagus in the vaults beneath the palace.
It's too late for your wisdom now. Geralt raised his head. One of the knowing ones should have been sent for.
You mean those charlatans with stars on their hats? Of course. About 10 of them came running later when it became known what lay in the sarcophagus, and what scrambled out of it at night. Though it didn't start manifesting straight away, oh no. For 7 years after the funeral there was peace. Then, one night, it was full moon. There were screams in the palace, shouting and commotion. I don't have to tell you this is your trade and you've read the proclamation. The infant had grown in the coffin, and how? Grown to have incredible teeth. In a word, she became a Striga. Pity you didn't see the corpses as I did. Had you'd have taken a great detour to avoid Vizima.
Geralt was silent.
Then, as I was saying, Velerad continued. Foltest summoned the whole crowd of sorcerers. They all jabbered at the same time and almost came to blows with those staffs they carry. To beat off the dogs, no doubt, once they've been set loose on them. And I think they regularly are. I'm sorry, Geralt, if you have a different opinion of wizards. No doubt you do in your profession. But to me they are swindlers and fools. You witchers inspire greater confidence in men. At least, you are more straightforward.
Geralt smiled but didn't comment.
But, to the point.
The castellan peered into his tankard and poured more beer for himself and the Rivian.
Some of the sorceress's advice didn't seem so stupid. One suggested burning the Striga together with the palace and the sarcophagus. Another advised chopping her head off. The rest were keen on driving aspen stakes into her body during the day, when the she-devil was asleep in her coffin, worn out by her night's delights. Unfortunately, one, a jester with a pointed hat and a bald pate, a hunchbacked hermit, argued it was magic. The spell could be undone and the Striga would turn into Foltest's little daughter, as pretty as a picture. Someone simply had to stay in the crypt throughout the night, and that would be that. After which, can you imagine such a fool, he went to the palace for the night. Little of him was left in the morning. Only, I believe, his hat and stick. But Foltest clung to his idea like a bird to a dog's tail. He forbade any attempt to kill the Striga and brought in charlatans from all corners of Vizima to reverse the spell and turn her into a princess. What colorful company. Twisted women, cripples, dirty and louse-ridden. It was pitiful. They went ahead and cast spells, mainly over a bowl and tankard. Of course, some were quickly exposed as frauds by Foltest or the council. A few were hung on the palisades, but not enough of them. I would have hung them all. I don't suppose I have to say that the Striga in the meantime was getting her teeth into all sorts of people every now and again, and paying no attention to the fraudsters and their spells. or that Foltest was no longer living in the palace. No one lived there anymore.
Velerad paused, drank some beer, and the Witcher waited in silence.
And so it's been for 7 years, Geralt, because she was born around 14 years ago. We've had a few other worries, like war with Vizima of Novigrad, fought for real, understandable reasons, over the border post, not for some princess or marriage alliance. Foltest sporadically hints at marriage and looks over portraits from neighboring courts, which he then throws down the privy. And every now and then this mania seizes hold of him again, and he sends horsemen out to look for new sorcerers. His promised reward, the 3,000, has attracted any number of cranks, stray knights, even a shepherd known throughout the whole region as a cretin. May he rest in peace. But the Striga is still doing well. Every now and again she gets her teeth into someone. You get used to it, and at least those heroes trying to reverse the spell have a use. The beast stuffs herself on the spot and doesn't roam beyond her palace. Foltest has a new palace, of course, quite the fine one.
In 7 years? Geralt raised his head. In 7 years no one has settled the matter?
Well, no.
Velerad's gaze penetrated the Witcher.
Because the matter can't be settled. We have to come to terms with it, especially Foltest, our gracious and beloved ruler, who will keep nailing these proclamations up at crossroads. Although there are fewer volunteers now. There was one recently, but he insisted on the 3,000 in advance, so we put him in a sack and threw him in the lake.
There is still no shortage of fraudsters, then?
No, far from it.
The castellan agreed without taking his eyes off the Witcher.
That's why you mustn't demand gold in advance when you go to the palace. If you go.
I'll go.
It's up to you, but remember my advice. As we're talking of the reward, there has been word recently about the second part of it. I mentioned it to you, the princess for a wife. I don't know who made it up, but if the Striga looks the way they say, then it's an exceptionally grim joke. Nevertheless, there's been no lack of fools racing to the palace for the chance of joining the royal family. 2 apprentice shoemakers, to be precise. Why are shoemakers so foolish, Geralt?
I don't know. And the Witcher's castellan, have they tried?
There were a few, but when they heard the spell was to be lifted and the Striga wasn't to be killed, they mostly shrugged and left. That's one of the reasons why my esteem for Witchers has grown, Geralt. And one came along, younger than you. I forget his name, if he gave it at all. He tried.
And?
The fanged princess spread his entrails over a considerable distance.
Geralt nodded. That was all of them?
There was one other. Velerad remained silent for a while, and the Witcher didn't urge him on. Yes, the castellan said finally, there was one more. At first, when Foltest threatened him with the noose if he killed or harmed the Striga, he laughed and started packing his belongings. But then he undertook the task. You see, Geralt, there are some wise men in Vizima, in high positions, who had enough of this whole affair. Rumor has it these men persuaded the Witcher in secret not to fuss around with spells but to batter the Striga to death and tell the king the spell had failed, that his dear daughter had been killed in self-defense. An accident at work. The king, of course, would be furious and refuse to pay an oren in reward. But that would be an end to it. The witty Witcher replied we could chase Strigas ourselves for nothing. Well, what could we do? We collected money, bargained, but nothing came off it.
Geralt raised his eyebrows.
Nothing, repeated Velerad. The Witcher didn't want to try that first night. He trudged around, lay in wait, wandered about the neighborhood. Finally, they say he saw the Striga in action, as she does not clamber from her crypt just to stretch her legs. He saw her and scarpered that night, without a word.
Geralt's expression changed a little, in what was probably supposed to be a smile. Those wise men, he said, they still have the money, no doubt. Witchers don't take payment in advance. No doubt they still do, said Velerad. Does the rumor say how much they offer? Velerad bared his teeth in a smile. Some say 800. Geralt shook his head. Others, murmured the castellan, talk of 1,000. Not much when you bear in mind that rumor likes to exaggerate. And the king is offering 3,000.
Don't forget about the betrothal,
Velerad mocked.
What are you talking about? It's obvious you won't get the 3,000.
How's it obvious? Velerad thumped the table.
Geralt, do not spoil my impression of witchers. This has been going on for more than 7 years. The Striga is finishing off up to 50 people a year. Fewer now people are avoiding the palace. Oh no, my friend, I believe in magic. I've seen a great deal, and I believe to a certain extent in the abilities of wizards and witchers. But all this nonsense about lifting the spell was made up by a hunchback, snotty old man who'd lost his mind on his hermit's diet. It's nonsense, which no one but Foltest believes. Ada gave birth to a Striga because she slept with her brother. That is the truth, and no spell will help. Now the Striga devours people, as Striggers do. She has to be killed, and that is that. Listen, 2 years ago, peasants from some godforsaken hole near Mahakam were plagued by a dragon devouring their sheep. They set out together, battered the dragon to death with stanchions, and did not even think it worth boasting about. But we in Vizima are waiting for a miracle and bolting our doors every full moon, or trying our criminals to a stake in front of the palace, praying the beast stuffs herself and returns to her sarcophagus.
Not a bad method. The Witcher smiled. Are there fewer criminals?
Not a bit of it.
Which way to the palace? The new one.
I will take you myself. And what about the wise man's suggestion?
Castellan, said Geralt. Why act in haste? After all, I really could have an accident at work, irrespective of my intentions. Just in case the wise man should be thinking about how to save me from the king's anger and get those 1,500 orens, of which rumor speaks, ready.
It was to be 1,000.
No, Lord Velerad, the Witcher said categorically. The Witcher who was offered 1,000 ran at the mere sight of the Striga, without bargaining. So the risk is greater than 1,000. Whether it is greater than 1.5 remains to be seen. Of course, I will say goodbye beforehand.
Geralt, Velerad scratched his head. 1,200?
No, this isn't an easy task. The king is offering 3, and sometimes it's easier to lift a spell than to kill. But one of my predecessors would have done so, or killed the Striga, if this were simple. You think they let themselves be devoured out of fear of the king?
Then, Witcher, Velerad nodded wistfully. Our agreement stands. But a word of advice. Say nothing to the king about the danger of an accident at work.